Great. So welcome, my friends, and it's a pleasure to see all of you, many of whom have been walking the road with us as we try to figure out how to provide a hybrid church experience. I want to let you know that while it's of interest to pastors and others to contemplate the ideas and philosophy and theology around creating an accessible worship and church program for people, the hottest interest, the most pressing questions are around the technology piece. And people are asking questions about what technology to use, what software to use, what skill sets are required, how much things cost. And it didn't take long for me to feel like I was out of my depth. And so luckily, early in this process, I met Troy Vaupel, and you'll see him here on your screen. Troy is, he'll tell you a little bit about himself before he starts, but Troy has been able to provide some specific free trainings to people back east. And he was gracious enough to give us a very good price on providing these trainings to our folks here. And Troy, before people ask, I'm going to ask you to put your contact information in the chat bar, because I'll bet you a nickel that folks are going to want to reach out to you, and they will see that this is your business, even though you are a faithful servant and have done a lot to support your conference. And I know you've been doing work for General Synod. I know that folks may want to reach out to you, and so we'll give them that opportunity, and you've provided your contact info in the chat bar. Today's gathering is going to be all about Troy, all about your questions. I'm here just to facilitate. And so with that, Troy, if you'll take just a minute to give folks a tiny bit of an overview and then just launch right into what you have to share, because my hunch is that people are going to have a lot of particular questions. Okay?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Kris. And I'm very happy that you reached out and gave me this opportunity to provide support to your conference. I am the owner and operator of Vaupel Video out of Evansville, Indiana. And typically what I specialize in is video production, filming and editing, graphic design for broadcast commercials and social media videos, things of that nature. During the pandemic, I produced 56 straight weeks of virtual worship for our congregation. And in the middle of that, I learned all about what it takes to live stream worship from your church. Late last year, we purchased everything and installed all the equipment in our church to start live streaming. And we did a few little tests here or there in the fall, and then early this year, and then the Sunday after Easter, we started holding hybrid worships every Sunday. So I've live streamed a lot of events for clients just with a single camera and microphone, all the way up to our church, which has 4 cameras and graphics and all kinds of things of that nature. So I have a lot of experience from, small to large. And tonight's session, we're going to kind of look at that bigger picture, larger houses of worship that require a little bit more resources and things of that nature. And with that, let's get started. I am going to share my screen. Hopefully it shares the right one. Okay. Thumbs up if you can see the screen. Awesome. Okay. Please advance. All right, so tonight what we're going to look at is what I call some initial considerations. We'll take a hard look at what the equipment needs are going to be, how it all connects together, putting it into action, and then the troubleshooting of it.
And Troy, if I may ask, do you want folks to interrupt you with questions? Do you want them to wait until the end? What's most comfortable for you?
You know what? I think let's go ahead and interrupt. That's fine. I'm comfortable with that because I have a feeling that I have a lot to go through tonight, and I would be concerned that if somebody had a question, they may forget about it later on. So yeah.
So you've met me. Yeah.
Well, excuse me. I have a tendency to get like super chatty and start racing through information because I know this so well. So I think interruptions might even help me sort of just take a breather and just calm down a little bit.
Right.
So yeah, so I'm totally fine. Yeah. So yeah, anytime you have a question, just interrupt, maybe wave a hand in the chat, whatever you feel comfortable doing. So so first of all, first steps, I always tell everybody this. I know tonight's more about the technology aspect. What do we need? But a big factor in what do we need is really what the goals of your hybrid worship are going to be. And I think those are different from each congregation. Some congregations I've spoke to is, hey, we just want people to be able to see what's going on in the sanctuary on Sundays and record that. Other churches are looking for ways to interact with that virtual audience along with their in-person audience. And those all have a little bit of an impact on some of the tools you may need. So as you're thinking about this, you need to keep that in mind. The really big thing to identify too is where are you going to live stream? A minister in our conference identified this and she said it so perfectly. She said, you need to go where your audience is. So if you've been holding a virtual worship service during the pandemic and you've been doing it on Facebook, and that's where everybody knows to go to see your worship, I would recommend out the gate, continue live streaming your hybrid worship at Facebook the first for a little while. That way people can still easily find where you're broadcasting from. At our church, we post everything on YouTube, but we embedded it into our website. So when we installed our equipment, we set it up to live stream directly on our website. That way that everybody knew where to go and there was no kind of confusion as we transitioned from completely pre-produced to the hybrid model. And then the one thing I always like to tell everybody, because we're all guilty of this, is try your best not to compare yourselves to other churches. We all have a tendency to look at other resources for ideas, suggestions, inspirations, and we can all kind of start thinking that the grass is greener and gosh, we should really be doing our worships like they are. And you can also get real self-conscious that maybe you aren't doing a good enough job. And just be mindful that every congregation has a different need. Every congregation has a different feel for their worship. So don't ever feel like you're not doing enough. Okay, you're gonna advance, please. There we go. Okay, big disclaimer. This presentation is for one solid setup, okay? Is it the only way to do it? No. Will a different way work? Absolutely. You should feel free to use this as a template and build the setup that best serves your needs. You may already have a little bit of equipment already in your church that you can repurpose for your hybrid worship. Feel free to do that. I had a conversation with someone a couple hours ago in our conference and was talking about buying a piece of equipment because something hasn't come in yet and they're like, we just can't get audio to our live stream. What should I get? What should we do? And I said, well, do you just have a microphone laying around? Yes, use that. So if you have things already in place, find a way to incorporate them. Okay, let's get into the nuts and bolts. So what are you going to need? Well, the must-haves are, of course, you're going to need a camera or cameras. Okay, how many do you need? Well, it really depends. If you have a really big sanctuary, you might need 2 or 3 or 4 cameras. If you have a smaller sanctuary, you might be able to get by with having 2 cameras. I would recommend considering, if you're going to purchase a camera, invest in what's called a pan, tilt, and zoom camera, or a PTZ camera. And we'll talk about that in much more detail in a little bit. But essentially what that does is that camera can move around in all kinds of directions, and you can zoom in. And what a lot of churches have started right out the gate is they'll have just one camera that just does a wide shot of the entire sanctuary. Then they'll buy a pan, tilt, and zoom camera to get close-ups of your minister during their message, maybe of a musician when they're performing a song. And then that way they just have two nice shots to really just kind of have a nice feel. You're going to want a tripod or a stand or a mount for the camera. You don't want to ask somebody in your congregation to stand there and hold a camera for an hour and a half real super steady. So you're going to need something for that camera to be attached to. If you're going to get a camera that is controlled, like mounted up on the wall, like a pan tilt PTZ camera, you're going to need a camera control unit. And essentially what that is a little box, and I got a picture of that here in a moment, that has a joystick on it that operates that pan, tilt, and zoom function I mentioned, okay? You're going to need what's called a switcher, which is essentially what that does is it turns on what your audience is seeing at home, okay? And you can change between however many sources you have connected to your system, okay? The big thing you're going to need is you're going to need a hardware encoder or a piece of computer software. And what this does is, for things to be seen online in a streamable format, there's a specific format that the internet needs, and it's an encoded file, okay? So what the encoder does is it takes your video and audio signal and encodes it into a format that could be streamed over the internet. And we're going to talk about both of those two options here in just a little bit. Now, you're also going to need audio, of course, and you can either use audio from your soundboard. If you have a sound system in your church already, an audio board, it's real easy to just run a cable from your audio board to your live stream setup, and that's completely taken care of. However, if you don't, then you're going to need a microphone, and it's going to need to be connected to your system as well. Okay. Okay. And then the last of the must-haves, you're going to need some cabling. For your video, that's going to be determined on what kind of outputs your cameras have. Okay. Some cameras come out with an HDMI cable, which I'm sure you've heard of. Other cameras have what's called an SDI or serial digital interface, or they might have a USB. So depending on what type of camera you use and how it's connected to your control box, you may or may not, that's going to have an impact on what type of cables you need. You're going to need Ethernet cables, especially for connecting to the internet with your live stream encoder. But also, too, the pan, tilt, and zoom cameras use an Ethernet cable to control them. So if you're going to have a couple of cameras set up in your sanctuary that are PTZ cameras, you're going to need to run the video cable and the Ethernet cable to them. So you'll run two to each camera. And then, of course, you'll need audio cables to connect your microphones and stuff. Or, like I said, if you're using an audio board, just one cable directly to your control system. That's how we have it at our church. Deb, do you have a question? I see your hand up.
It just seems timely. We've had one specific question come up. We've been streaming to YouTube successfully, but now that some people have been in the sanctuary listening, we realize we have no audio in the room. So we're not sure how to split the audio. If we're both be in person and be online, how do we have audio in both places?
It really depends on your audio board, but what I can say probably is going on is that it's just connected to your audio board, like out of a microphone jack, and it's turning off your speakers. I'm just guessing without being able to physically look at it. Mm-hmm. And what you need to do is, and this is going to come across really technical, audio boards have what are called auxiliary outputs. Mm-hmm. And essentially what those are they are an output that just bypasses what's going to the speakers and goes to something independently. what's great about auxiliary outputs is that you can send a signal to your live stream through an auxiliary output, and the volume that's going to your live stream will stay the same. But if you make the volume in your sanctuary louder or softer, it doesn't impact that. And vice versa. You can individually make your live stream audio louder without blowing everybody out in your sanctuary. So what I'm guessing is that how you've got your audio board connected to your live stream is connected to something that's turning off the speakers in your sanctuary.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. Now, some optional equipment just to keep in mind that you may or may not need is depending on what you're using to control your live stream, you might need a converter box or two. And essentially, this could be anything from something that changes one video signal to another, or an audio signal to another, depending on how you're connecting one device to another. So think about it this way, back in the old days where some of the TVs might have, may or may not have the RCA, the yellow, the red and white cables, you might have to go into something that changes it into a connector on the back of a unit. Those are real easy to get. And as you build your system, you start seeing the connectors, it's real easy to find those. But without knowing what system you're going to try to install, I can't say, oh, you'll definitely need this and this, but that may be something you might have to get. We have one in our sanctuary. We have a laptop that sends graphics to our switcher, and our switcher has SDI connectors, but our laptops come out HDMI. So I have to convert from an HDMI cable to an SDI cable. And it's just a little box that costs about $50. All right, so here is an example of our church layout. And as you can see, in the back of the room down here, you have our control center, and we have our audio board, which we already had, and then we installed all of our live stream equipment right next to it. We have 4 cameras in our sanctuary. We have a very, very long sanctuary. So what we decided to do was we put one camera in the very back of our sanctuary, and it's what's called a fixed camera. It doesn't pan, it doesn't tilt, but we do have the capacity to zoom in and out with it. Now, left and right side of our church, we have pan, tilt, and zoom cameras. That gives us a lot of coverage of our pulpit, our altar, our lectern. And then one of the things we decided to do is we went ahead and got an additional zoom camera for right up here in this choir loft, and it's mobile. The connectors of how we're connected to that, we have a plate in the wall. And then I hook some cables to that, and we've got about 40 feet of cable. So I can actually take that camera and move it around the front of our church to get some really interesting shots. It'll be nice whenever our choir comes back, because I can turn that and highlight our choir and get a really nice shot. One thing I should mention too, that I should have led with earlier, we were really, sorry, I looked at the chat and got distracted. We were really fortunate. We have a trust at our church, and that family had wanted to make an investment in this campus, specifically in the technical area. So it's a very generous trust, and we had put a plan together to do live streaming. Of course, we were thinking 2 years down the road, and then about the time we were like, oh, let's put this plan together, the pandemic hit. So we were really fortunate to have a lot of resources available. So we went big. Do we need 4 cameras? No, but we had the resources. And no, the mobile camera is not operated by a person. It is just a zoom camera, and it is controlled by that joystick controller I was talking about earlier.
And Troy, if I may ask,
yeah,
is that camera up in the choir loft, is that able then to show the people in the pews?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
if I'm at home, I can still find out who's wearing what and who's sitting with whom.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
You sure can. Because you can put that anywhere you want. And I've got an example. Well, I didn't incorporate that, But some Sundays I have it just on our organist because our people at home haven't gotten to see Sherry in a year and a half. This past Sunday, we had a new member join our congregation and she was facing the altar. So all the camera angles had her back. And I was like, well, we have someone joining. It would be lovely to see her face. So I used that camera to focus on her and I could cut to that as she was making her statement of faith and that sort of thing. So it gives us a lot of versatility down the road to incorporate that for a lot of different events. Okay. The other elements we have in place is we have a video switcher, which essentially just toggles on and off what camera our at-home audience is seeing. Okay. We have a hardware encoder. Our video switcher goes out into that hardware encoder. The encoder sends it to the internet. Okay. One of the big things, because we went this route, we wanted to have was a local hard drive backup recording of our service. Okay, because we're not connected to a computer that's controlling our live stream. We're using hardware equipment. We bought a recording backup and I have a hard drive that I plug into that. I press record at the beginning of our worship and it records right to that. So if the internet were to go out or something of that nature, I have a local recording that I can then upload to social media later for people to watch. Okay. I have a monitor. It's a 24-inch Vizio. That's just kind of my control monitor, shows what all my camera shots look like. Of course, our audio board that is connected to the system. And then I use a laptop that controls, that starts and stops our live stream. And then it also we can use for on-screen graphics during worship. Okay.
So
Any
let's take a breath here.
Sure.
And Bill Freeman, I appreciated your comment because, yeah, this is Greek to a lot of us, right? So
absolutely.
So, I want to be sensitive, Troy, that you have your presentation, but I'm wondering at this point, where our folks are. Are they thinking, holy mackerel, my brother's still holding my iPhone in the front row, or are they thinking this is great because we were just going to go out and shop for a switcher or a whatever. So folks, if you want to unmute for a minute, give an impression, throw something in the chat. Are you drinking from a fire hose right now, or you feel like we're on track? I would imagine that people would like to know what some of these things cost. And I know you're going to talk about that, Troy, as well as availability. So anybody?
This is Mark Foster from Pilgrim.
Hey, Mark.
If I could just say, most of this stuff we've gotten at some degree. We're a much smaller church. We don't have 4 cameras. We have 1 PTZ camera. We do software encoding. So I'm just kind of interested in seeing what other options might be available out there as we continue to try to improve our system. We have most of these components and we are already doing hybrid worship. But I just want to see, what we might do better. Audio is one of our issues, and also cameras, better, maybe higher quality cameras.
All right. Thanks for that.
Okay.
Somebody else. Thanks. I'm going to make a note of these things too. Anybody else? Anything you're thinking or want to make sure we cover? By we, I mean Troy.
This is Peter. I'm with Woodland Hills Community Church. We have a similar setup to the layout on the screen. We have 2 cameras, not 4. We have a Zoom camera, actually 2 Zoom cameras. And I guess we need to upgrade the cameras, definitely. While you were talking, I looked at the price for the PT20X and it's like $2,000. So that's pretty expensive. I don't know if there's one that's cheaper than that, but
there is, and I can't get to it right away, but I can talk to what we have. A PTZ optic controller that I use for mine. It was not $2,000. I know that for a fact. So there is a more reasonable option out there for that. Absolutely. And I saw a comment in the chat from Lee. Lee, we are going to do one that is a little bit more of simplified version. This one tonight was more to talk to, okay, the bigger size church that needs more coverage and things. But tomorrow's nights is really going to focus, okay, now we have a smaller church, maybe a smaller budget, not a lot of resources at the gate to go out and just buy everything. You know, how do we maybe continue to use our phone or a laptop? How do we use Zoom instead of everything else? And we're going to talk about those options in greater detail tomorrow night. But the things we'll talk about tonight, they overlap, but this kind of gives you an understanding of how everything works. And then now, how do you do this with a little bit, with some smaller resources?
Good, thanks. Anybody else at this point?
This is Lolita, and
Hi.
I am at a Quaker meeting. And I have to say, number one, this is awesome. And actually, it's all starting to make sense because I have people who do all this, and they have been saying all these words. And it's now, this presentation is helping me to understand all those geek in the hallway kind of conversations. Because my job is just to keep it moving, you know, stop the geek, stop talking about it and just do it.
Yeah.
But so this is really helpful, but the one complication that we've added is being a Quaker meeting, we do interactive worship. We do silent worship, and then people speak out of the silence. And so we've had to add video screens and a way to, obviously the sound system will also, so we can see people at home as well as people at home seeing us, and then allow people at home to talk to us as well as us to talk to them. So we're going to use, we've been using Zoom pretty successfully, but I don't know if that, you don't have to add that into your presentation, but if there's something that you want to throw in as a bonus to me, you know, be prepared for the XYZ, or this is going to be a problem, that would be good. But I think our folks have it covered, but I really appreciate this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
No,
Appreciate
thank
you
you.
sharing that.
And I do have a piece of software in the presentation later that does allow for that kind of interaction with your at-home audience. And we'll talk about that a little bit. There's a lot of software out there that is designed for that. And one of the things I want to mention too is that everything I'm going to discuss tonight and tomorrow night, I am going to speak to things that I have personally used. I'll mention names of other products that I've heard people talk about, but I won't give any commentary or feedback or hearsay of what they've said. I don't want to mislead you and say, oh yeah, I heard this was great, and you go out and get it and it doesn't work for you. But everything I talk about are things that I physically used and I have good feedback on, and I will certainly share with you, you know, what's great about it, what could be better, but more importantly is sometimes it does this, and this is how you fix it. Because after 8 weeks of live streaming our worship, we've probably had 2 weekends where everything went exactly as advertised. The other 6 weeks, we've had some really big issues happen. And then we've had some other things where it's like, okay, that's weird. Let's go through the steps and we get it fixed, okay? It's all fixable, but until the first time you experience it, you kind of have that panic flop sweat moment on a Sunday morning. And it's okay. And it really, really is okay, because it's going to happen. And then after you experience it and you figure out how to fix it, the next time it happens, you immediately know, okay, step one is to try this, and then try this, and then try this. So yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. What do you use your television monitor for? Is that in the control center, or where is that?
Here, I'll show you. So here's our control center. Okay, right here is our video switcher, and you can see that big red button shows that's what our audience is seeing up here. Okay, that Bethlehem graphic that my mouse is on. The green is the preview monitor. That is when I transition shots, essentially it's going to swap those two shots. So my green is previewing what is going to be seen next. Next to the video switcher right there is that joystick controller I was talking about. And the nice thing about the joystick controller is it can control up to 8 cameras. Now they make some that are bigger and of course some that are smaller, and it has a little button you press on it to take control of each individual camera. Now, at this point, I was still using 2 cameras. This camera right here is what's generating some graphics that I'm using for full screen. All this one right here is doing is starting and stopping our live stream. So the multi-view television monitor right here just essentially shows you what each one of your sources, cameras or computers, have on screen, so you can decide what shot you're going to go to next.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very similar to like a live sporting event or the news or things like that. This setup is very similar to what you would find if you went into a news station.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
one thing, Troy, I just want to, you may have mentioned this, but you know, the churches in your area received Lilly grants.
We did.
Grants from the Lilly Foundation. And so that's why so many of them were able to purchase this equipment. So after hearing that, I thought, what the heck? So I wrote a letter to Lilly and said, you know, your friends in California would love to participate in that and be your West Coast guinea pigs. And I just today received word back that they politely gave me a no thank you.
Oh,
So anyway, it was worth a try.
Well, and I wonder if there aren't other organizations out there, like on your coast, that might be exploring that, providing those opportunities. I mean, yeah, and that's, you know, a lot of churches, especially in Indiana, who applied for that grant, they bought a lot of stuff just to do virtual worship.
Right.
But then they're taking a lot of that virtual worship equipment and repurposing it for the live stream. That we have a church in Indianapolis that bought 2 like handheld cameras to produce their virtual service. But now that they're migrating to live streaming, they're going to use those 2 cameras as static cameras for wide shots. And they're going to buy 1 pan, tilt, and zoom camera for all the coverage. So, and that totally works. And it's going to be great. I thought that was a tremendous idea.
Good.
Yeah, it is really good.
All right. Anybody else before Troy continues? Anything else that's burning deep in your hearts and minds? Okay. Thanks, Troy. Go ahead.
Oh, you're welcome. Absolutely. Okay. So here's an example of the PTZ camera. This is the full pan, tilt, and zoom camera and what it looks like. The camera that just zooms in and out, it's about like this big. It's your typical kind of like box. And like I said, you can use that remote control joystick that you see on the screen right there to control your cameras. What's really nice about that control unit too is that you can save preset camera positions and just press a button and it'll change the shot. So if your minister always gives the sermon from behind the pulpit, you can program that. So if in the middle of how you're doing things, if you have that camera pointed over here and you know that, oh, they're going to move over to their pulpit, you press a number and it just does it automatically. And you can have up to 9 presets per camera. And that's what I've got programmed, and I have a little cheat sheet. So that way, as you grow your tech team and they come in, you can just say, hey, at this point in the service, press camera 1 on the controller, hit 2, and it'll set your shot up for you. So it can take a lot of that anxiety about how do I do all this stuff, and because I don't do it every week. Okay, like I mentioned, the remote can control multiple cameras, and then the cameras can be mounted up on the wall anywhere you want them. The camera in the back of our sanctuary is right underneath the exit sign. Our 2 pan, tilt, and zoom cameras are mounted behind some nice wood archways. So they're out of the way. They're not very obvious. So, you know, people aren't upset about looking at them. So, and they're very easily mounted. Any questions about this? I just wanted you to kind of get an idea of the size. And the pan, tilt, and zoom camera, I would say, is probably at most about this big. I mean, it's not very big, and it actually comes in white and black, and I believe gray. So here's an example from our sanctuary. This is the zoom camera that's in the back of our sanctuary. You can see in the top picture, that's it zoomed all the way out. So you can almost see our entire sanctuary, our congregants sitting in the pews. And then the bottom picture shows you that's about half the distance it can zoom in. I can actually almost zoom all the way into our minister from that camera. So that gives you a good representation on the PTZ zoom camera about how far you can zoom in and out, even in a very long sanctuary. And then this is the pan, tilt, and zoom camera we have on the left side of our sanctuary. As you can see up here, this is our liturgist reading. Here's a shot of our altar. Typically what I do, our minister doesn't like to be on camera when she's leading us in prayer. She gets a little self-conscious about that. So I do a nice shot of the altar because our altar guild decorates it every weekend with really lovely flowers. So while we're doing prayer, I do a nice close-up shot of that. And then you can see on the bottom photo how wide that same camera can get to represent our bell choir. So you can see the versatility of that pan, tilt, and zoom camera, as I mentioned before. And then the pan, tilt, and zoom camera that's on the right side, our minister delivering her message, the nice, very nice close-up shot of her. And this was from our past Sunday when we were welcoming our new member into our congregation. A lot of churches are buying one, and it's giving them all the coverage they need. And they're using maybe just one fixed camera or another camera that they have. You know, the only thing is that if you know, depending on how you can connect the camera, if you have like a handy cam or something like that you're using for your wide shot, you might not be able to control that and change the focal length. But if you just want a really wide shot just to show off the whole church, it doesn't really matter if somebody's there to manually control it.
So if you were just to get one camera, would you still recommend using a TV monitor and a video switcher to?
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
that is just around the corner.
Okay.
It's actually the very next slide.
Okay.
Okay, so now that we've talked about the cameras and potentially a computer for graphics and things of that nature, now is really the time where you kind of have to make a decision, which road do I want to go down? Okay, you can buy a video switcher, and that's what you see right here. And as you can see on it, you have all your inputs lined up there. Everything, if you go this route, everything connects to this switcher, and then one signal comes out of that to your live stream, okay? It's really nice to use. You have the ability to grow into it because if you start with 2 cameras and then 2 years from now, you want to add 2 more, you just install them and plug them in. No fuss, no muss, nothing changes.
So that's a switcher and an encoder then?
No, that is just a switcher.
Okay, you said it sent it out to the live stream.
Well, it sends it to the encoder, which sends it to the live stream.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for catching that. Or you can go with software option like OBS, Restream, or something like that, which again, you just take all your sources, your camera, your audio board, and everything else, and plug that directly into a computer. A piece of software like OBS or open broadcasting software, which I'm sure many of you have heard about, it does the exact same thing as a video switcher, just from the computer interface, okay? Both options are fantastic. I have used both options multiple times. The only reason why I went with an actual video switcher at the time we got it was I didn't want to have a computer to be a part of the equation, because if the computer goes out, the internet goes out, there's not a lot you can do. And also our computer's a little bit older and it doesn't have enough inputs into it for us to connect 4 cameras and an audio source. And I'm going to explain that in greater detail in just a second. But when you asked earlier about the Zoom option, what other pieces of software there were to maybe kind of get that connection between your home audience and your in-person worship, Restream is an option to consider. Restream, it's a paid service. I'm going to say that up front. It does require a subscription. But what's nice about Restream is that people who connect in there, from the controller interface, you can select who's seen on your live stream. So say I was using Restream right now, everybody who's connected via a webcam would show up as a source in Restream. And if I just wanted to throw Kris onto the screen, I turn her on and everybody else off. Everybody can see her and hear her. They can also still hear us if I leave their microphones open. Or maybe Mitchell, who I see, or Peter. We can put the three of them on camera, okay? And that gives you that ability. And then you can send that to the monitors in your church. So they can, so like if you had someone speaking at home over a picture of your sanctuary, you could overlay those. Restream, it has some flaws. All paid software has great things, bad things. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. But Restream is an option to investigate. And there are a lot of pieces of software that do that same sort of thing. Zoom works great, but you had asked specifically, is there a software alternative? And I've used Restream to live stream a couple of events. The people who were on camera emceeing the event were out of Atlanta, Georgia. I invited them into that room and I was able to control their cameras. I could put them on camera at the same time. I could have one of them on camera, that sort of thing. And it's not really expensive. I think it's $20 to $30 a month. And Restream also has the ability to send your live stream directly to wherever you want it to go. Just like OBS. OBS sends whatever it's seeing inside the software directly to wherever you're live streaming, whether it be your website or Facebook or YouTube. So you don't need that hardware encoder you need with a video switcher.
Let's pause there.
I was going to say, let's pause there.
to digest and metabolize.
Yes.
Any questions specific to what he was just sharing with regard to the software option and the switcher? And those are the only two words I know. So anyone?
And we're going to explore each one of these paths individually in more detail. But yeah, if there's any questions, please don't hesitate.
Yeah, I've got a question. So our church uses the ATEM Mini. Well, we used the original ATEM Mini and then it got the hugest one.
Yes.
And I think it has it has the encoder built in. It has two USB, so you can hook one up to an SSD and one to your, right? It's got the whole thing. Is there something that I'm missing that the 4K, your 4K switcher does that doesn't? And
no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And as far as what YouTube can handle, because we go to YouTube, as far as I know, it can only go up to like 1080p streamed. All right. So is there like some benefit to trying to get a 4K switcher, I guess is what I'm asking.
No, there's no benefit at all. And I think at the time we bought ours, the built-in encoder wasn't an option, which I think Blackmagic started to incorporate now that everybody's doing it. We only went with the 4K switcher because at the time it was on sale. And just in case 5-10 years down the road, hey, everybody's doing 4K, all we have to replace are the cameras, not the switcher. But you're exactly right, David. Most things are taking 1080, and if you're streaming to Facebook, you can only stream at 720. So yeah, so really there's no benefit to it unless you can get it for a reasonable amount of money. I mean, really, it's one of those things is if you think you're going to still be using this in 5 or 10 years and maybe you'll be streaming in 4K, maybe, but really, no, there's no benefit. I mean, I've been in business for 4 years, self-employed. I film everything in 4K, but I've never sent anything out in 4K because there's just nobody really broadcasting in 4K yet. And also too, I mean, your audience probably won't be watching it in 4K. So, but that's a very good question, David. Very, very good. Because I mean, in one of the earlier presentations I did, that was one of the things I talked about, 4K or not to 4K. And I was just like, ignore it. Because it's more money. And more importantly too, it sucks up a lot more of your internet bandwidth. So if you have, if you're connected to your church's internet, which you're going to be to live stream, and you have a Wi-Fi there that's on the same thing and everybody connects when they get there, you're going to have a hard time getting a solid signal and bandwidth to stream that amount of data via 4K.
All right. Well, that was such a fascinating conversation. It was, and I just have more respect for the two of you. So go ahead, Troy.
Oh, okay. By the time this is done, Kris, you're going to understand all this to be able to give this lecture. Okay, so the console switcher option, like I mentioned earlier, everything connects to this device. So if you have multiple cameras, you have a computer designated specifically for graphics, and your audio board coming into this system, everything connects to this as what's called a source, or something you can use to put on screen. Depending on the model, I mean, you can get anywhere from 4 inputs, 8 inputs. I mean, there are even some that are 16 inputs. I mean, can you imagine having 16 sources in your house of worship? And it's a little bit easier for on-the-fly switching between sources. Whereas Restream, you're kind of going in and turning eyes on and off and stuff like that. And it can become a little bit difficult to find that. This is a little bit easier to use for what it's worth. Okay. The other thing with this is you are going to need some sort of device to transfer your video and audio signal into a streamable format if you use a console. And you could, and I'll show you a picture of it in a minute, but you can use what's called a Matrox hardware encoder, that this system goes out into that. It encodes that signal and sends it out. Or one church who is waiting on their encoder to get to their church, they're sending this to their computer and hooking it into OBS and just funneling right through that to their live stream. So multiple options. Again, is there a better way or a different way? There's all kinds of ways to do this. And then what's really nice about this is with this system, your internet goes out, your computer isn't working. You can still direct and perform a live event with this switcher and record it to a local hard drive, regardless if the internet's out, your computer doesn't work, that sort of thing. Very first weekend we went to live stream. On Saturday, I live streamed a wedding from our sanctuary and it went like clockwork. Sunday morning, we've been talking about coming to worship for several weeks. This is the first weekend. While the pandemic was going on, not only was Troy creating, virtual worship for us, he installed all this live streaming gear, a lot of hype. Sunday morning, we start live streaming. My phone's lighting up like Christmas morning, and I'm thinking it's everybody sending me pictures. We're watching, this is great and everything. All of a sudden, someone comes back to me and taps me on the shoulder and says, all the audio going out is pure static. That's what everybody's hearing at home. And I'm just like, I have no idea what to do now. Flop sweat, we talked about earlier. What was nice was because our system, our switcher, goes into a hard drive recorder, I knew that signal was perfectly fine. And I knew immediately, like, okay, so we had a little bit of a technical glitch. I still have a recording that'll be fine that I can post later. So that's one of the nice things about this, is that's kind of that redundant thing. Are there options with using a computer? 100% yes. I'm just saying, for me personally, this made me feel a little bit more comfortable because I'm used to working with this, and I'm directing our live streams on Sunday mornings.
This is Mark. I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead,
This
Mark.
is, yeah. Just to clarify again, you're not broadcasting live stream though. You're capturing you're capturing your service, and then you're going to put it on later.
No, we are actually live when we're in the house of worship.
No, I understand that. But if your internet crashes, you aren't
Yes.
broadcasting. Okay.
You're right. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all.
Yeah. No, you're
Okay.
fine. And that was the only weekend we had to do that. And that
Right.
was,
And then you record it and post it later. Okay. got it.
Yeah. And one of the other things we do for our church as well with that recording is that we have a lot of limited mobility members, and a couple of members of our church deliver iPads to them. And I take that recording and encode it in a smaller file to dump onto our iPads for them to deliver to them. So that gives us the opportunity to kind of do different things with that. And we stream directly to our website, but we also simulcast to YouTube as well for the church shopper. And the nice thing about going to YouTube is when you stream to YouTube, it automatically records your service. So it's up there as soon as your worship's over. But just in case something goes a little bit awry, that's why we have that hard drive recorder backup. So now let's talk a little bit about the software control options. So there are tons and tons and tons, and even more every day, options of software to use to live stream. The two I have used is OBS, or Open Broadcasting Software, and it's free. And one of the nice things about it being free is it's open source. And if you're unfamiliar with what the term open source means is it is created by people who use it, and they're constantly making updates to it. So it's really great software because the people who want something that's reliable and does exactly what they want it to do, they're working on it and always making it better. And then of course, I did mention Restream a little bit earlier. It's a paid service, but I've used it and it's really good. Now, some other names you may have heard, but I've never personally used them, are vMix, VidBlaster. There's tons of them. And they come in all different shapes and sizes, all kinds of different subscription fees and things of that nature. I think the big difference you'll see between all those different price points is, it's just kind of features difference. Like, you may pay $30 a month for this one, but at $50 a month, this one does a little bit something different. But there's always trade-offs with that as well, because they're trying to be competitive on their pricing. But if you're considering using a computer that you already have, I can easily say OBS is a great place to start. It's really reliable and it works really well. The bonus, if you're using a software, it does the stream encoding for you. So no need to have another hardware encoder in the mix, and you're not spending money on that. Okay, so there's no need for extra equipment or any kind of configuration. And you can directly record what OBS is sending out to a live stream locally to your computer hard drive as well. And the nice thing is too, is that you can preload graphics and videos from the exact same computer that you're running OBS on into into the interface and just turn it on and turn it off as you like. So the bonus to doing kind of a software configuration or using the software to run your live stream is that you can really do it from just one device as opposed to having 3, 4, or 5 devices. Okay. A lot of people choose this option just because it's a lot easier and you don't need as many people involved. The red tape on this is you can only have enough devices connected to available that you have open USB ports, because everything connects via either HDMI or USB. A lot of times it's USB. So if you've got one HDMI and 2 USB ports, you can only have 3 devices connected. And keep in mind, your audio board counts as a device. So if you have 3 cameras and audio, you're going to need 4 open ports for OBS to see it. Is that a huge thing? No. You can easily add USB ports to a computer and they plug right into your motherboard. If you have somebody in your church who's comfortable with computers, it's real easy to do. But I want to make sure I mention that to you because a lot of people have tried to use OBS and use multiple camera and audio setups, and they get there and they're like, I don't have enough room to plug it in. So that's just something to consider if you're going to go this option, is to kind of make sure that you have enough room for all the things you want to connect to it. And like I said earlier, with the paid softwares, you do get what you pay for. Most paid software options, they have perks and have limitations based on their price point. You're certainly going to want to do your research on those different types of things to go, sorry, every time the chat goes, I get distracted.
Yeah, and I'm watching. Go ahead.
No,
and finish.
it's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
I'm just that way, squirrel. So yeah, so that's essentially it. So you'll certainly want to do your research if you looked at that paid. If you look at a paid option, but like I said, OBS is great. It's very reliable. It's really easy to use once you get past the learning curve. It has a very unique interface. It has a very unique way of setting everything up. There are tons of training videos on YouTube that are really good. They can step you through it. Once you've set everything up 2 or 3 times, it becomes very easy to set up and use week after week. And the nice thing is too, it's like anything else. Once everything's connected and you save it as what it calls a scene, that always recalls. So you have camera 1 and camera 2 and graphics set is an input. Every time you open, it's going to preload that scene you saved, and it's just going to start like fresh every time you boot it up. Any questions about the software options? Okay. All right. Let's take a small moment before we get into connecting everything together. Now, regardless of the option you choose, of course, all of your devices are still going to have to be connected to what I call the controller, which is either the video switcher or your computer. Now, if you're using the PTZ cameras like we showed earlier, like I mentioned, they connect via 2 cables. You're going to have that SDI cable. Think old cable, like, cable you get from your local provider. It's that kind of size, but it has just a different connector on it. That's what sends your video signal from your camera to your control unit. And then it uses Cat6 Ethernet to run to the camera controller. And I want to make sure that I mentioned that it uses Cat6 Ethernet for that. And then the other thing you need to connect is audio from your soundboard or your microphones if you're going that route. Now, here's a picture of one option of a hardware, of a video recorder. And as you can see, this has 2 slots on it. And all that is essentially a hard disk recorder to record your system if you're using a video switcher. And if you are using a video switcher without a computer involved, I highly recommend you invest in some sort of hardware, a hard drive recorder. Okay, and the nice thing about this is storage space is getting cheaper and cheaper every day. You can buy a solid state drive, which is it's a very fast drive, and you can get a 1 terabyte hard drive for about $100. And the nice thing is you plug it in, press record, and then if you want to give it to someone to maybe pull out the sermon just to post one day on your website or something like that, as long as you have a device that you can load that into and read it, you can use it. It's very versatile. And I highly, highly, highly recommend that you record locally. That way, like we mentioned earlier, if you're not streaming live, but you're recording to broadcast later, this makes it a little bit easier to do that. And then the bottom unit is a picture of that hardware encoder I talked about earlier. If you're not connected to a computer that's encoding your signal into a streamable format, you're going to need a device like this. And these are the 2 units that we personally have in Bethlehem. There are smaller units of the Blackmagic Studio recorder. There are other brands that make it as well. And then the Matrox Monarch HD interface is really good. It's a really good unit, and it's fairly reasonable. Any questions? We've covered a lot, and I'm worried everybody's quiet now. I think I've fried everybody's brains.
Well, that's why it's beneficial that we're recording this.
Absolutely.
And since we're taking a deep breath, if you folks would be so kind as to put your name and church and email address in the chat, then I will happily send you the link to this recording so that you can share it with your family over dinner tonight and wow them.
Or you can use this as a way to put your kids to sleep later. All right, so let's get technical for just a moment. If you're going to go with the video switcher, the Blackmagic video switcher, and then use that encoder box to get your encoder set up to transmit to your social media platform of choice, someone with an IT background is going to need to configure that. We hired a local company that specializes in selling and installation of this equipment to do this for us. We didn't really have a lot of people at our church with an IT background that were interested in being involved in this. So I went with the local company. And what's great about that is they completely set up and installed everything. And not only did they set up and install everything, but they create an interface for us to directly log into through a web browser that is specifically only for our church. And it has the controls for starting and stopping our live stream, gives me the ability to start streaming to YouTube at the same time. And the really great thing is that for $1,100 a year, we can record our service directly to their server as well. So now I have another backup. And anytime anything goes wrong, they come out and fix it covered. And we've had a couple of things with this equipment get reset, get a little bit, not working correctly. They're there within a couple of hours to take care of all of it. But they handled that setup. And the reason why I know that you have to log into the Matrox box to set it up is that this is super technical, and you don't have to know this, but I'll share it with you. So the way our system is set up is that our Matrox encoder is on a variable IP address. So every time it tries to connect, it changes its IP address. Somehow, magically, through time, that got reset to a static IP address. And when I tried to run a live stream rehearsal one day, it wouldn't connect. And when Flint came out to troubleshoot it, he logged in and he's like, it's on a static IP address. I've never had one do this before, because technology is great as long as it works. But he knew how to connect directly to that via laptop, go in, configure all those settings, and get it up and running. Now, if you have somebody in your sanctuary who does this type of work all the time, they're easily going to be able to do that. That's not something, I understand the theory behind it, but I don't really have enough experience with it. So just keep that in mind. If you're going with that option, you're going to need somebody who really understands that, who can sit down and work through it and take care of it. And a lot of churches have resources like that. Or you could potentially, outsource that to an IT group to kind of come in and configure that for you the first time. But that's one big thing I wanted to be sure to mention to you, is that that does require a little bit of stuff. Any questions about that? Okay. All right. So how does it really work when you're going to start live streaming your service? Bare bones, essentially what it does is when you're ready to go live, you're going to start the stream on your social media platform. If you're using the video encoder we were talking about, that box, once you get those two synced up to look for each other out in the wonderful wild, World Wide Web, when you start streaming on YouTube or Facebook or even your website, you'll hit stream, then you'll press a button on your Matrox encoder, and those two will start sending a signal to try and catch up with one another. Once those two signals get connected, you're streaming and you're good to go. Okay. Sometimes what might happen is that as those signals are going, they kind of miss each other, and the Matrox encoder may time out without the signal. You'll get a little yellow light on the front of it, and all you have to do is start that cycle again and it'll find it. I've learned that through experience. And what I've learned from that is don't try to start your live stream 2 minutes before your worship time. Go ahead and start at about 10 or 15 minutes and have a nice graphic up, or hey, just show the sanctuary so we can see who's there, like someone mentioned earlier. And if you're using a recording backup right at the beginning, get in the habit of always pressing record on that right as you start, so you have that recording of your entire worship service.
This is Mark Foster. Another suggestion: we have a slide loop that just loops through with music of announcements, the general announcements. Mm-hmm. And we do that for 10 minutes prior while the webinar is started. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And one of the things we're currently looking at, we have an older graphics program that our contemporary service on Saturday night uses for graphics. And I'm looking at options to kind of better options, more versatile options I'm looking at Pro Presenter currently, and I want to do that exact same thing. Is like you said, is have announcements, have maybe some recordings of some other music, maybe special guests or organist or things of that nature. And like you said, have 5, 10, 15 minutes of just pre-roll information on our service. But that is a wonderful idea, Mark. And the nice thing is that gives you 10 to 15 minutes of, if something's not talking to one another very nicely, that gives you some time to troubleshoot that.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely. I had this weird thing in my head that if worship starts at 10:15, we need to start the stream right at 10:15. It's just, yeah, no, don't do that. Don't do that to yourselves. All right, Houston, we have a problem. Be sure to run a few, if not several, test drives of your live stream before you actually try to hold your first hybrid worship. What's great about that is that gives you experience running the show, whether you're using computer software or the video switcher to control your event. This is that time where you start to see, okay, this seems to happen sporadically. One device isn't being nice to the other device. How do we fix that? And you can kind of get that troubleshooting checklist in place. Couple of things I've experienced that tend to happen randomly, but seem to be the two kind of troubleshooting issues I have to work through the most is, like I mentioned earlier, the Matrox hard drive not catching that ping from our live stream server and having to restart that. And then the other thing we have, which is very peculiar, is sometimes, for some reason, our hard drive recorder unit won't get a video signal from our video switcher. Typically, the easiest thing to do is you just change the type of input from SDI to HDMI and back, and that fixes it. Sometimes it doesn't. And there's another thing I have to do on our switcher to go in and troubleshoot that. It's one of those things that shouldn't happen, but hey, it's technology and it wants to be squirrely. But now that I know those things, I have them all written down. I have that troubleshoot checklist, and I know that, okay, this has happened before, and we just go through them. And it's kind of similar to the static audio issue I was talking about earlier. Somehow when the Matrox system started sending our live stream out, it corrupted the audio file or the audio signal. All I would have needed to do is power cycle that. 90% of things, if you turn it off and turn it back on again, it fixes it. Or you just try to get things to kind of restart up and start talking to each other. That's the big things. You have so many devices trying to work in harmony together. And sometimes there's just a little bit of conflict and things of that nature. And just make a list of things that you experience and know this is the steps we go through when this doesn't work or that doesn't work.
Hey, Troy, this is Mark Foster again. Sorry to keep interrupting.
No, go
here.
ahead.
But I will point out the biggest issue we have, and somebody alluded to this, we have sound in the sanctuary and we have sound that's going out. And the issue that we have is you'll get sound in the sanctuary, but for some reason, again, the right button hadn't been pushed, sending sound out to the broadcast. And so the people on Zoom or the people actually getting the Facebook are not getting sound. So it's really important. My recommendation is somebody has to monitor that channel somebody in the sanctuary has to be connected to the live stream feed and monitoring that, because the two are not identical.
You are 100% correct, Mark. And one thing I'll mention to everyone that I hadn't thought about, but I'll mention, is that one of the big things when you're live streaming that you want to make sure that you have, regardless of where you're live streaming to, is you want to consider something that's called latency. And what latency is, it's a delay in your broadcast. And YouTube calls it latency. Essentially what it does is your live stream, it can be anywhere from 30 seconds to a full minute behind what's happening in your house of worship. That is there for this reason. Everybody has squirrely internet at home. If you have that built-in latency and you've got 60 seconds behind, if someone at home has a little bit of an internet hiccup, it's already got 60 seconds preloaded in what you're watching. So as that internet signal is catching up and re-establishing a solid internet connection, you don't get pixelation, you don't get a frozen screen or any of that. So make sure that if you're setting up your live stream via Facebook or your website or YouTube, to keep normal latency on, so that way what you're sending has that delay in it, okay? A lot of people feel like, well, no, I don't want it to be behind, and that's fine, but you have a lot of people then calling you saying, gosh, I can't keep the internet signal going on. It keeps lagging, the audio cuts out, the video's real pixelated. Well, you know, you can't control what internet speed everybody has in their home. You know, are they trying to watch it connected to a Wi-Fi at McDonald's in their car? I mean, but if you have that latency established, you're not going to run into that because everybody's internet will have time to catch up. And that's why, like Mark was saying there, that's good too, because then that gives you an opportunity to kind of hear what's going on. Now it will be, as you're monitoring the live stream on a headphone in the sanctuary, it'll be a little bit jarring because what you're hearing on the live stream will be behind what you're hearing live. So don't be shocked by that as well. That throws a lot of people off, but you really want to have that latency involved in your live stream just for that internet hiccup on your end users viewing. And that goes back to what Mark said right there. That goes back to my first weekend, because I live streamed the day before and it went perfectly well. I didn't put the headphones on that morning to check the audio signal because in my head, it worked yesterday, it'll be perfectly fine today. I learned from that the hard way. Okay, so let's talk a little bit real quick. What do you mean by it's back ordered? Lot of organizations are out there, they're installing all these different types of equipment to hold hybrid events. There is a very realistic chance that as you go to try and buy maybe a PTZ camera or that joystick controller or maybe a switcher or that sort of thing, that they're back ordered. So don't be surprised if you run into that. And also don't be surprised that if you order it and it says it's going to ship in 2 days, and then in 2 days you get an email saying it's back ordered and you can't get it for 10 to 12 weeks. Okay. All this stuff is in extremely high demand. When we ordered our equipment last June, 65% of it was in like 14 days, and then we were waiting on 2 items for months. So don't be surprised if you run into that. You know, you have choices of what to do in the interim. If you're currently pre-producing a virtual worship service, just continue to do that till the equipment comes in. Or if you get a lot of stuff in and you have enough stuff with what you currently have and what you bought to get up and running on a hybrid worship, you can do that. I had a conference call with a church in our conference Monday night. They're waiting on that hardware encoder. And when I asked them, I said, you guys have been waiting on that for a while. What's the ETA on that? And they just smiled and shrugged and they said, July? And that's kind of what they're being told now. But what they're going to do in the interim, because they're actually not this Sunday, but the following Sunday, they're going to hold their first hybrid worship service. They've got a very similar setup to what Bethlehem has, but they're going to connect everything into a computer with OBS and just pass right through OBS to stream on their YouTube channel until that comes in. So even if there are some items that are a little bit delayed on receiving, there are a lot of options on how you can make it work even until you get everything in. Okay, so last things I have before we have a tons of questions and just talk about what we're all doing and maybe try to work through some of the things for experiences. I know this is all really overwhelming, and the farther we get into it, I felt like it might answer all the questions, but probably has confused you maybe a little bit more. But don't feel bad, you're not alone. I mean, I'm a working professional, and when we started this process and I started hearing all the things you guys are hearing tonight and these names and data rates and all these sort of things, it was really stressful and overwhelming for me. So I just encourage you to remember to relax and just take a big breath, okay? It's going to be totally okay if something goes wrong on a Sunday. It's going to happen. Just work through the problems and always remember, not only is this going to be a way for those members of your church who are not ready to come back into a house of worship yet, it is a wonderful new ministry for your congregation. And it's a great way to grow and promote what your church is doing and reach out to the active church shopper. It's a great new ministry. It's a wonderful blessing to all of our churches. And I truly believe in my heart, it is going to be the future of how we worship and offer church to people in our communities. So be excited about it, and it's going to be fine.
You know, Troy, one of the things that I've shared in some of our previous presentations is that the research that's coming out from folks about this whole hybrid worship experience and church experiences, that the largest number of those polled who are hoping that we as churches continue to provide options for programming, either live or from home. The largest group expressing that hope, it comes from the unchurched, or those who have not yet connected or found a home church. So I think that reminds us that this is every bit as evangelical or an outreach tool as anything else we're doing. And we do know that there are churches who are committed to not reopening until everybody has the vaccine, or committed to not reopening until everybody feels comfortable and safe. So this is also an accessibility issue as well. So we have some time. I want to make sure folks have a chance to ask each other or you, Troy, any questions they might have. Anybody?
I see a couple of questions here from Mark.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I got a couple of questions. Okay. We're feeding our the panning camera, the sanctuary camera, in through OBS, and we're doing that. That's going through a controlled computer. So that's working fine. We were thinking of going to a secondary camera, like you say, maybe just adding a camera, but doing it simply. Is there a wireless camera that you could hook up directly to the PC, or are you just all USB cameras?
I can't, I'm sure there is a wireless option, but I can't speak to one specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Our congregation, we are barely 2 miles from our airport. So we have a lot of overlap in frequency. We had an issue for about 6 months where we could not keep our minister's mic from like fuzzing out and popping really loud due to that crosstalk from that. So wireless is a really big struggle for us. So I just was with those experiences, I didn't even look at wireless cameras, but I have heard from a lot of people that, there are a lot of malls and stores and things of that nature that use wireless cameras for a lot of purposes. So I would highly encourage you to investigate that. And to be honest with you too, I'm wondering if PTZ, the manufacturer that makes the PTZ optics, which makes this camera, they may even offer a wireless option. I'm just kind of wired in my head of just 20 years of broadcast experience that if you can have it hardwired, it's more reliable.
Oh, I agree completely. Yeah.
But I say that, but the more I look at it, there are so many wireless options out there that are very stable and work really well. So, and the nice thing about a wireless option is it saves you money for running cabling, headaches of running cabling. I was talking to someone in our conference today about the issues they're dealing with their 105-year-old church of trying to find just an empty space to run a cable 30 feet. And they just keep running into insulation and weird studs in the wall and things of that nature. So wireless is a good option. And I apologize. I wish I had a recommendation, but I wouldn't hesitate to look for one.
Okay, that I just wanted to know if you had any experience with one. And,
Sure.
And the second thing is, in the hardware encoder, the software, the OBS, we use the OBS software. It can, when I say solve the latency or the disconnect between audio and video. This is the question. I guess does the hardware encoder have an option to do that too?
Are you talking about the latency, or are you talking about like a sync? Like with
A sync issue. I mean, again,
Yeah.
you're getting the video feed and it's not quite in sync with the audio feed. Yeah.
That is a great question that a lot of people aren't familiar with. OBS, one of its kind of Achilles heels is it has a hard time keeping the audio in sync with the video. So like as I'm speaking, my audio might be a second or two behind what my mouth is doing. There is a workaround for that within OBS. It takes a
Yeah,
little
we use
work.
it.
Yeah. The only drawback to that is that the only way to really test it is to run a live stream and have someone go in another room and
Right.
watch it, or
Right.
to do a recording test and just change it and tweak it until you get it there. Now, one of
Okay.
the things I'll mention, Mark, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but even when you get that set up in sync, that sometimes if you're monitoring OBS, it'll still look out of sync, yet your stream is okay. I've had that happen to me, and I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but I live streamed an event 3 months ago for an organization, and I just used a microphone and a small little webcam for it. It was a state of the school address, and I spent about an hour testing that with the recordings and checking the sync, and I got it to where it was in sync. But then when we went live and I was watching him, he was about a half a second off.
Oh, wow.
In the software, the live
Yeah.
stream was totally fine, but
Oh, okay.
monitoring it via the OBS software, it was still a little bit out of sync. But that's kind of the only big quirky issue that anybody really reports with OBS is kind of that sync issue. And there's tons of YouTube videos out there of how to correct that.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Yeah, it does take a lot of trial and error to get the number of milliseconds inherent in your system. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
And it is very frustrating because it shouldn't be that difficult to troubleshoot that, but it is.
Okay.
But I'm glad you worked through it. But yeah, that is the thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Now somebody, I'm
Any other
sorry.
questions? Any other questions?
Yeah, I had one thing I wanted to add real
Okay.
quick, Chris, was someone asked about the joystick controller cost. We bought what was called the PTZ Optics PT Joy G3 joystick controller, and it was $714. So I think someone had talked about they had looked at one and it was right around $2,000. There is a PTZ Optics does make a controller for about $715. I mean, it's still $715, but it is better than $2,000.
Great. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Can I ask one, please?
Please.
Hi, I'm Yasu from Westwood Hills Congregational Church.
Thanks for being here, Yasu.
No, thank you. The two questions. So the computer, if we go with the computer route, like what is your recommendation for the specs?
Yeah, I would say if you have, as far as specs, I mean, you're going to want a fair amount of storage. I would say, I mean, I think you'd be fine running something on a computer you've bought in the past 2 to 4 years. You'd be totally fine. And if you look at OBS's requirements, it'll tell you minimum specs, and whatever it tells you, you'll be fine. Most stuff, Ethernet bandwidth is kind of the big one you need to be concerned with, but even like YouTube and Facebook only stream at about 2.5 megs per second. So even if you have a 30 megabyte per second internet, that's plenty of bandwidth for that. But any computer you've bought in the past 4 or 5 years is easily going to be able to run OBS. It doesn't take up a lot of, it's not a big install, and it doesn't take a lot of resources to run it.
Thank you. And another question is, this is a little bit stupid question, but
there are none. There are no stupid questions.
We don't. So this is gonna be like first time like we're gonna do like live streaming or even like sound system. Like we do have like newly installed sound system, but so how many people do we need to run like sound and and visual?
Okay. Well, I would say as many as you feel you need to be comfortable. In our current situation, and I do not recommend nor justify this plan, we have two people. We have one person running the audio board, and then I control the live stream, the video switcher, the camera, and all the graphics.
Yikes.
Yeah, I don't encourage anybody else to do that. We're in the process of growing our team. And can I do all of that? Yes. Would our worship service be better if we had multiple hands involved? 100%, absolutely. I feel comfortable doing it, but Mark identified earlier, there are times where I'm not listening to the live stream of the audio because I'm trying to pay attention to what's happening live in the service. So if our audio feed gets messed up, I'll miss that. Could we do more with our graphics if we had someone else involved? Absolutely. I think it just really depends on how much you want to have going on in your worship service and how much each person of your team feels comfortable controlling during the live stream. You may have one person for each role, or you might have one person on audio, one person working a switcher and the camera controls, and another person using graphics. So it can be up to all of those.
Thank you so
It's
much.
really, it's a personal choice in
Yeah.
comfort level.
And
Yeah.
and I think what you both have been talking about is one of the challenges that churches have, the building the capacity for people to be able to volunteer in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's one of the things, like, we're kind of looking at now is I'm starting to reach out to our youth. I mean, they're all on summer break and they're traveling, but I'm hoping, especially our confirmation class from last year, reaching out to all of them, encouraging them to participate in this when school starts back up in the fall. Other members of our congregation, trying to find those ways for people to get engaged in the life of the
Right,
church.
right.
And that's exactly what Kris was talking about, and that connection of service. And this is a fun way for that younger group to be involved, be engaged, do something that they're interested in, and be excited about doing.
Yeah. And I recognize that, there are plenty of people out in your churches who can keep up with this conversation. I'm not one of them, but that's okay. What I am doing, though, is after meeting Troy and having a connection with Troy, what I'm doing is gifting my pastor some time with Troy when and if it's needed. And if it means that Troy helps bring some people up to speed in terms of skills, or cuts some time out of the pastor's schedule so that somebody else can address these things, it's just a matter of, doing what you can with what you have where you are. And so we recognize that it's just a process for everybody. One of our 14-year-olds is one of yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Well, and I don't know, you guys may have seen my 9-year-old kind of walking behind me. I've even been showing him, he can work the video switcher after a
Right.
little bit of instruction. He knows how to work the joystick controller and things of that nature. So
Right.
yeah, everybody can learn how to do it. It's overwhelming when you look at it in person right there, and you see a lot of people like run from it, like a lot of people do with technology, but
Right.
it is all very easily to learn once you get over that kind of anxiety.
So in our plan, again, what we're trying to do at the conference level is provide you with support and resources that you need. So this is our first but not last presentation. So don't hesitate to reach out to us and let us know what you need next, right? This comes in bite-sized pieces, but I'm going to put my email in the chat. And if you have requests or you need something, we'll do our best to bring it to you, even if it means we need to hire someone, right? So the conference board is very supportive, as is the leadership at the conference. So any last questions?
I'd just like to make a comment.
Yeah.
Our group has been told that under no circumstance will I run the soundboard or the I will under no because I will crash it. I'm very good at it. That said, I am the beta tester because they know if they can teach me how to do it, if I can get through it once without crashing it, then it will work. But I do want to point out that, you know, Troy pointed out that it's crazy to think about doing this with less than 2 people, 3 people maybe. The pastor has a job on Sundays.
Yes, they do.
And it is
Yes,
not
they
running the
do.
soundboard or the computer.
Yeah.
And, you know, so that's something that I think that we want to make sure that everybody knows, because I know
Yeah.
there's been some pastors who've done some really awesome things with streaming from their homes and buying computers and cameras and all of that, but they're tired.
Mhm.
And it's time to expand our volunteer
Yeah,
base
right.
and even, you know, maybe open our pocketbooks a little bit and
Yeah,
hire somebody to do this who's really
Right.
looking for a job and would love to be a Troy Jr.
Right.
So yeah, you know, it's a good chance for everybody to learn, but then to remember that the church is all the people.
Yeah.
And yeah, so share it widely.
And
Yeah.
thank you. That's such an important reminder that that's not sustainable for the pastor to be in that seat. And, you know, there are different ways to giving to your church. And so, like I said, that, you know, I just texted my pastor and said, okay, I found a new way to support you. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Well, and I'm so glad you share that as well. And I 100% agree with you and advocate on behalf of all the ministers out there for that. And one of the things that was really wonderful about creating the virtual worship for our church is I had direct access to our minister for 56 weeks, and a lot of spiritual help, a lot of emotional help during the highs and the lows. And that went both ways. And I, you know, as we got closer and closer to coming back to hybrid worship and things of that nature, you know, that was one of the things she talked about, is just how tired she felt coming out of the pandemic and coming back into that. And that's one of the things I said to her was like, yeah, don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to not let things be on your plate. You know, and as I talk to other churches and they say, hey, what does our tech team look like and how is our minister involved? The big reply I always give is, your minister is there to tell you what the order of worship will be on Sunday, and that's it. No other responsibilities. You know, your minister's job is to serve for the spiritual growth of your church. That's their responsibility, and that's where their focus is.
Yeah.
All this other stuff is where everybody else falls in. So thank you for mentioning that, because I totally support that and advocate for that.
Great. All right, my friends, our time has come to a close. As I said, I have your
Kris,
email.
Is
Oh, yes.
tomorrow's session for smaller churches, is the content will be the same?
Go ahead, Troy.
Oh, it will be similar, but it will be looking at how do we do it with maybe a laptop or an iPhone and a detached microphone, or one camera and just YouTube, those sorts of things like that for churches that don't need this big of a setup. But we'll be talking about kind of using, again, how do you use those with OBS? How do you use those with Facebook or YouTube and those sorts of things? So, you know, kind of that smaller need from a church versus this. So it's going to be looking at all those options and looking at, you know, camera options for like studio, you know, small little webcams that you can use that are a little bit better than typically what we use here, and names and recommendations of that.
Is that helpful? And feel free, Mitchell, to either attend or send one of your folks to that as well. You know, we want to make sure.
We kind of straddle the categories.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So thank you again. I will send the link to the recording to your email.
Yes.
And we're happy for you to use it. We also just want to make sure that, you know, you don't include it in your Christmas card list. Okay. So thank you all again. Troy, thank you. This is, we're getting a lot of positive response in the chat. And so we'll be back on tomorrow. And then folks, as the need arises in the future, we'd be happy to bring Troy back. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
See you
Thanks,
tomorrow
Troy.
night.
Okay,
Mhm.
bye-bye.